Hi everyone, this is Navika Chhauda, a cloud engineer, Microsoft most valuable professional, and a LinkedIn top voice in cloud computing. I warmly welcome each one of you to the 16th episode of Tech Chat with Navika, wherein today we would be discussing a very interesting topic, that is, scaling up your business with Azure Migration. And to share some more insights on it, we have an expert with us today, Mr. Alex Will. Alex is a Microsoft Most Valuable Professional in Azure category, having extensive working experience in the IT industry. He's currently the Chief Technology Officer at Architect Now. His technical expertise lies of cloud, Microsoft Azure, .NET software development, and JavaScript, and the list goes on. Alex is extremely passionate about sharing his knowledge with the community, and he has been making significant impact by his contributions. Thank you so much, Alex, for taking out your precious time and joining me in today.
Yes, thank you, Rue. I'm happy to be here.
My pleasure. All right, then let's get started. All right. We are seeing nowadays that so many businesses, actually all the businesses, are striving to provide the most efficient solutions to their customers, right? In terms of, the duration, it should be fast delivery as well as the cost optimization. It should be pretty much cost efficient. And I think here, migrating to cloud can actually help the businesses achieve their goals easy and also to make their job easier, right? And in today's episode, we would be specifically talking about Azure migration specifically. So I think it would be good to start with the why part of it as to why, in your opinion, why should businesses migrate to Azure?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question we see all the time in businesses. We see a ton of different perspectives from across different industries. Why people are getting to cloud is more for flexibility, scalability, and security, and sometimes even cost optimization. So, why are they getting to cloud and why this conversation starts? Sometimes it could be as simple as with all this new Microsoft Copilot stuff and AI, they want to take advantage of it, right? And on their on-prem world, they don't have the tools or expertise to take advantage of it. So what we're finding businesses do is they are starting to look at the cloud providers, specifically Azure for a lot of especially larger enterprises, to be the first one to get there. And what this allows businesses to do is on multiple different fronts. So it allows businesses to think about their technology department in a different way. So you
Mhm.
have the ability to do things such as spin up brand new services you could never do on-prem. Basically, how I talk to some of my clients about it is if you're building a new app or a new service, you're going to use the same tools you had before on-prem. You're going to have your standard VM over here, your standard SQL server, your standard IaaS, all that kind of stuff. You're kind of working in a certain guardrail. With the cloud, you're kind of expanding your offerings to try new things and honestly fail faster sometimes. And that's kind of where we're seeing a lot of power come is hey, all your different developers, your different businesses have a ton of new tools that you may or may not use, but it's there for your availability. And the flexibility and scalability of these worldwide platforms on Azure, especially with the uptick in data and analytics, it's becoming a very big reason for people to start looking at the cloud.
That's right. And as you just mentioned, I think scalability, elasticity, and the optimization factor of Azure actually makes it, it's like that's what attracts the consumers, right? To sort of migrate to Azure. I absolutely second your point. You also spoke about data and analytics and a few like AI services that it's come up with. So I think we can take this up as a separate question altogether. That what are the different type of industry solutions does Azure provides? So maybe you can just throw light on some top four, top five industry solutions and what it is all about if you would like to share with the audience.
Yeah, definitely. So we are seeing a lot of healthcare getting into Azure. We're seeing a lot of manufacturing going up there, as well as financial services. They all using the cloud for compute, storage, but how you use it for compute and storage are different between industries. So we've been integrating with things like the Azure Fire API, which is a healthcare it's kind of the standard for healthcare to transmit data, and that kind of allows people like us or people that need quick HIPAA compliance storage to quickly, integrate with Epic or these other large EHRs. So they're allowing some customers and some people to quickly get into the cloud and start creating actual apps to integrate with them. Before, it would take a ton of work on-prem to get the compliance and get everything set up. Other things we're seeing, especially in like the manufacturing world, is the IoT. So in
Mhm.
Azure, you're easily able to scale up your IoT offering and use things like IoT Hub, device twins, things like that in the manufacturing world and other worlds too that have been a massive win for these different companies, as well as financial services. There are tools inside of Azure to help with fraud detection, risk analytics, things like that. Those are kind of some industry specific ones, but the big one for everyone across the scale
Mhm.
there is the amount of security that Microsoft is investing in there. That is a major kind of selling point for us as well. Is Microsoft security team is usually putting a lot more money and a lot more research into it than your own team can possibly ever do. They have full teams dedicated to that. So we're able to kind of piggyback off of that on our own services and easily implement them into our kind of pipeline of applications or business projects and take advantage of their industry leading security with very without much resistance or without much effort on our side.
That's true. That's true. Thank you for such an insightful answer. I think, I mean, Azure definitely, I think provides, if I'm not wrong, maybe with 200 plus services, and altogether 80 plus categories, if I'm not wrong, as far as I'm able to recall, right? So definitely, like Azure is like an ocean, and I absolutely second your point that it provides us with so many, different services which we can test and try and integrate with the solutions. That's definitely there. I think as we just spoke about in the first question as well, cost optimization, because every business always aims at bringing down their cost as much as possible, right? And in generally, if we talk about cloud, also the best uh, part about cloud is the pay as you go model, right? We
Mhm.
really have to just pay exactly for the resources that we're using, and the same applies to Azure as well. So, can you just throw some light as to how can businesses optimize their cloud, their cost using Azure, or if you want to
Yeah.
share some pricing models of Azure as well.
Yeah. So one thing back on the kind of ocean of Azure services, you are completely right in that in the sense of like if I asked you to store files in Azure, probably tell me 7 different ways of doing it, right? Or if you
Right.
ask me to do I know, different things inside Azure, there's a ton of things. One resource I have started giving to a lot of people out there, it's a free resource uh, by someone at Microsoft that made it. It's called azurecharts.com, and I can send you a link to that as well. Basically, it's kind of like a restaurant menu style of Azure offerings, and it kind of gives you insights into customer stories of what. So let's say like I used app services and I used the Cosmic DB. I could say I'm using that, and it will parse all of like Microsoft's customer stories and find out different services that were used alongside that with different customers. So that's a massive tool that we've been using a lot. I'll kind of send it to you after this as well. So back to cost optimization.
Hmm.
This is probably one of the most fun talks I ever have because cost always comes up. It always
Hmm.
kind of starts with that capex versus opex model.
I
So when I'm
see.
talking, yeah. So when I'm
Yeah.
talking to a lot of business leaders out there, we always get into this talk about, okay, I have a capital expenditure. So for example, I'm going to buy my own bare metal. I'm going to spend $5,000 on this bare metal machine with different solid state drives, et cetera. It's going to be one upfront payment, which would be capital expenditure there. And you're kind of pre-planning for the future of costs.
Hmm.
In the more Azure world, the more cloud native world,
Hmm.
it's more of a operational expense. You're leasing things as you go for consumption. You're no longer having a big capital expenditure up front. You're kind of doing a month to month lease of those services. So in the Azure world, the Microsoft world is called pay as you go for a lot of things, consumption. The pay as you go is a very overloaded term inside of Microsoft, but for this instance, inside of Azure, we're talking about being able to buy VMs by the hour, buy app services by the hour, or buy things like in SQL servers called DTUs, where you're buying it based off your IO and storage. So it
Hmm.
kind of changes the whole model that financial departments and businesses kind of think about spending with Azure. And
Hmm.
understanding that is kind of the basis before you can get to optimization is understanding how things are built.
Hmm.
Um, so how we look at things inside of Azure for optimization are pretty simple to start with. Are, hey, you have a VM out there. Are you actually using it? Right? Are you actually using that big machine that you had on-prem, or can we right size it and then
Mm-hmm.
set up scaling for it later. So what that means is we'll take a look. So a very common story we get is we had 10 servers on-prem. We migrated 10 servers to Azure. We duplicated their exact size and everything, and we left it there. And now we're paying a lot more than we did on Azure than we did on-prem. That is true. You probably are at that point, right? But you're not
Right.
actually taking advantage of the scalability and elasticability of Azure. So what we do is we take a look at your CPU, RAM, and other metrics and load on your machines, and we can start, right sizing it or using scaling to say, oh, during these hours you're usually busier, so let's put this up to a bigger machine for that. But during the nighttime, it's barely used. Let's knock it down to a smaller machine and save you money.
Mm-hmm.
That is one of the first ways that we save a lot of people money. Second way is actually just turning things off that aren't being used. That's also a big one. Other parts of
Mm-hmm.
the optimization that we look at is if you know you're going to be using particular parts of your environment for long periods of time, talk about 1 or 3 years typically. Think of SQL servers, like you're not going to go away from SQL within a year. You can do a thing
Mm-hmm.
called reserved instances or compute
Yeah.
savings plans. And basically what that means is for like reserved instances is I'm telling Microsoft I will be using this SQL Server machine size or VM size, whatever it is, for 1 to 3 years, and I guarantee it. They will then give you a very large discount based off the term on your state on your compute. So if you know you're going to be using something, looking at reserved instances is a great way of doing it. The other one is called Azure Compute Savings Plan. It's a little bit newer. I think it was released late 2022 or 2023. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's basically a more flexible version of reserved instances. So with reserved instances, you're pretty much saying I need a SKU of a VM or a SKU of whatever, and I guarantee I'll be using that same exact SKU, and you get discounts on it. Azure Compute
Mm-hmm.
Savings Plan is more saying I know I'm going to use compute, such as app services, VMs, etc. I know I'm going to use this much per year. Give me a small discount. It's not as big of a discount as reserved instances, but you still are getting a discount because you are kind of committing to a minimum spend of compute in Azure. And those are super simple ways of optimizing. We also take a look at your licensing. So licensing is always a big question in the Microsoft world. In
Mm-hmm.
general, has probably been licensing has probably been the question since Microsoft's been around. But there are ways to take advantage of a thing called hybrid licensing. So if you're already paying for SQL Server licenses, Windows licenses, etc., and you spin up those resources in Azure, you're able to save on licensing costs if you're already paying for a perpetual license or something along those lines. So it's a very tiered approach inside of cost optimization. The easy ones are you using it? Is it the right size? Are we using the right type of resource? Can we switch from a VM to an Azure function or a container app or something along those lines? Then after that, if we are in the right resources, can we commit to a certain amount of spend on there to save money? Next one is you typically are there licenses or things we can also benefit savings from. So it's a very tiered approach, but it's a standard one that we use here all the time.
Right. I think you've covered all the points. I mean, even I had like about Azure reservations and all, and literally everything is covered. I think like one more just in addition. I mean, some if you want to be more vigilant about, how much are you spending, and that you're well within your budgets. I think we can set some budgets as well, right?
Yes.
And some alertings as well. That maybe we get alerted at certain percentage consumed or something, just for the businesses who really want to be vigilant. I mean, that can just be one more add on as well. Um, you know, but yeah, rest is always about scaling it up and down, vertical scaling, horizontal scaling,
Yeah.
as and when how the requirement is. That's pretty much true. Now that we have, completed the why part of Azure migration, we have also spoken about, the benefits that we get with migrating to Azure. We have also spoken about cost optimization in detail. I think now we're in a good stage to discuss a little bit about a well-planned infrastructure in Azure. So once migrating to Azure, one should be having a proper infrastructure in place with strong roots. And I think as we talk about that, it's very important to have a good strategy in place, planning, implementing phase, etc., etc. So if you can just throw a little bit more insights on that as to what are the different strategies that companies can actually implement while migrating to Azure.
Yeah, definitely. So we do this a ton with Azure migrations all the time. I usually like to start with some of the business leaders there. to talk about the kind of rationalization of going to the cloud. It's not something I made up. This is something that I found on the internet with Microsoft a long time ago. It's called the 5 R's. And basically, it's kind of like a thought process to work with your business leaders to make sure you're understanding the rationalization of going to the cloud. We use this alongside with the well architected framework as well. But kind of the 5 R's real quick, just to kind of give you like the high level is well, the first one's rehost. It's basically kind of what everyone does, right? You have a bare metal on-prem, you kind of rehost it into Azure. So that's the first R, right? The second R is it's called refactor. So now let's say you have an app service on-prem, it's running IaaS. Can I refactor that to run on it? Or sorry, a VM on-prem using IaaS. Can I refactor that to use an app service, so platform as a service, and then cloud? Probably a good time to find those terms real quick. So there's really 3 offerings, right? Infrastructure as a service, think VMs, platform as a service. So you're pretty much saying, I don't care about some of the updating the OS, managing the availability, things like that you would for a VM, and you're using their platform to host your application. And then software as a service. Think of APIs you integrate with inside of like Graph API, things like that. Storage accounts that you can already built out for you. You're just interfacing with them. So I just wanted to define those terms real quick. So refactor would be going from a VM to an app service, for example. Re-architecting is another one. So this one might be something where you have the VMs on-prem, but they don't make sense going to the cloud that way. They could be part, Power Automate. They could be part of a SaaS offering inside of Azure, or it could be a different total tool set inside Azure since you now have a bigger tool belt to use things. There's a ton of things you want to look at there. Then rebuild is I kind of mix up re-architect and rebuild there. But rebuild essentially means you realize that this is not going to take advantage of the cloud. You're not taking advantage. Your business has changed a ton in the past few years, and it's time to rethink this application to fit more aligned with the cloud approach and also realign with your business. We actually saw this a lot in the past few years. We saw a ton of people going to sprinting to the cloud, and their business has changed so much due to data and stuff that their old apps they're forcing to work around their business, and it was time to kind of rebuild. The last R there is replace. So now, since there are more offerings that are kind of in a marketplace and is buy versus build, there are times where you can just totally replace different aspects of your software and just have them completely as a service in the cloud. Things like that have been common ones have been like domain controllers are now going to be part of Azure Domain Services, things like that, and can completely replace that software that was on-prem into the cloud. Those were the kind of 5 R's. And then we kind of jump into what's called the Azure Well Architect Framework as kind of our next step. So what this does is it kind of provides a framework and guidelines for everyone in the business to kind of be on board and have a great time getting to Azure. So some of the things that Microsoft found was people would get to Azure and they'd be like, now what? Or they would do it incorrectly or not streamlined approach, and they'd have a bad experience and then say the cloud is some trend and go away, right? That's what some people think. But what most likely happened is they just had some issues getting to the cloud and didn't have the right guidance. So Microsoft came out with the well-architected framework and 5 pillars to be exact in that, that allows people to kind of have that mindset and framework to get to the cloud. The 5 pillars include the cost optimization, which we already talked about. That allows you to kind of understand where the money's going, how it's being utilized, figure out your ROI on it. Next part is the operational excellence. So basically is when you get to the cloud, how do you make sure everything is running smoothly and operating as it was on-prem? Because since you don't have access to the bare metal servers now, all that type of stuff, you're kind of limited to some of the Microsoft tools to debug. So you want to make sure you kind of have that same operational excellence in there to make sure you're not missing anything in your move and staying in the cloud. Performance efficiency. You need to have some sort of benchmark before you go to the cloud to make sure that you're still reaching these benchmarks and SLAs when you get there. Since we are right-sizing the machine and most likely not having extra compute just to have extra compute, you need to make sure you can, your servers can handle that, the peak and valley of loads. The next pillar is reliability. So in Microsoft world and Azure, it makes it a lot easier since you aren't managing so many data centers. A lot of data centers to deploy the places are a click of a button now instead of multiple year contracts and all that kind of crazy stuff. But making sure you can have the reliability and SLAs for your clients is going to be very important. So you want to make sure you're designing your systems around disaster zones, availability zones, redundancy, using things like edge servers, all that kind of stuff to do reliability. And then the most important one that I don't think not a lot of people talk about is security. So
Yeah.
your security no longer is the how it used to be, the perimeter of your office, right? You are
Mhm.
sharing your Azure data centers with other people. You're putting your app services to some or your apps to somewhere that you don't really have full control over. So you need to understand security. And a lot of times, what I've seen is people think of security as the same as they did on-prem. They'll take their same networking standards and their same everything, their same security practices, and throw them in the cloud. In reality, networking and security is a little bit different in the cloud, a little bit different mindsets. You're not having one big network. You go through hub and spoke models. So security is a big pillar of that as well. But making sure that you understand these and go through the different tools and different assessments in there will put you in a lot better position to actually have to migrate and stay in Azure and kind of understand what's going on and have a very productive process up there.
That's right. Thank you, Alex, for such a detailed answer, and thank you for covering the five pillars of the Azure infrastructure as well. Because I think, as I mentioned right in the beginning, right, the companies strive to achieve that. And in my opinion, I think Azure migration is it is like a continuous process, right? It's not something that just happens overnight. And I think when it comes to achieving these five pillars of Azure architecture or cloud architecture in general, I think it's more about when you get onto it, you understand, right? I mean, when it comes to cost optimization, it's like you'll have to see, you know, last month or 2 3 months duration, that how your what your infra is actually consuming, and that's when you can actually take a strong decision, be it on reservations or anything else as well. And similarly goes for other factors as well. So it's more about getting on there and then seeing what's actually happening inside your infra and then taking the decisions accordingly. But thank you so much once again for covering this up. And this brings us to the end of the podcast. And it was a pleasure, connecting with you here in the podcast, and your answers were really informative and educative. Thank you so much, Alex. We started from scratch and we have ended up on the Azure architecture. So thanks a lot once again for that. Before we end, do you want to give any signing off note?
Yeah, I mean, with Azure, I'd always say reach out to either MVPs or partners that have already been inside of Azure and been experts in there. There's a ton of stuff there, a ton of guidance. It is very overwhelming when you get in there. I completely understand. It was very overwhelming when I first got in there. It took a lot of failures and a lot of trying to figure out what I'm doing in there. I would say learn from other people's past mistakes, read their blogs, watch the rest of these podcasts here, reach out to partners, and it'll kind of help streamline your approach and comfortability getting to the cloud.
That's right. That's right. In fact, they have Microsoft Learn, that is like a documentation. They have a lot of learning paths,
Yep.
modules, certification. You can just get on there and, sort of it's like a plethora of, you will get plethora of knowledge over there. So that's right. Thank you so much, Alex, once again.
Thank you.